Don't you dare leave me. Stay with me, please.
It's all right. I love you.
The bullet tore through her shoulder. In the split second, she made a choice that would change everything. And as Brenda collapsed into his arms, the Korean Mafia boss finally understood the one thing his empire could never protect him from. This is the moment everything started to change. The fluorescent lights of the 47th floor hummed their monotonous symphony as Brenda Jakes smoothed down her charcoal pencil skirt and straightened the stack of confidential folders on her desk. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, long past the time when reasonable people went home to their families. But Brenda had learned 3 years ago that working for the Kang Empire meant operating on a different clock entirely, one that ticked to the rhythm of international wire transfers, coded messages, and meetings that never appeared on any official calendar. She pressed her fingertips against her temples, trying to massage away the headache that had been building since the afternoon conference call. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive suite, Seoul glittered like a galaxy fallen to Earth, beautiful and indifferent to the secrets buried in buildings like this one. Brenda had long stopped asking herself how a black single mother from Illinois had ended up managing the corporate offices of South Korea's most powerful and most dangerous business empire. She knew the answer. Desperation had brought her here, and something far more complicated had made her stay. The soft ding of the private elevator made her pulse quicken in a way she'd trained herself not to acknowledge. Only one person used that elevator at this hour. Only one person made the air in the room feel suddenly thinner, charged with the kind of electricity that preceded lightning strikes. Kang Min-jae emerged from the elevator, like a shadow gaining substance, 6 feet of controlled lethality wrapped in a bespoke Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than her annual rent. His face could have been carved from marble by an artist who understood that true beauty often came with an edge sharp enough to draw blood. High cheekbones, a jaw that looked capable of making decisions that ended lives, and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He didn't look at her immediately. He never did. It was part of the dance they'd perfected over 3 years. The careful choreography of employer and employee, of man and woman, of predator and... what? Prey? Brenda had never been sure which role she played in whatever this was between them. The Busan Files, he said in that voice that managed to be both velvet and steel. His English was flawless, barely touched by an accent, which somehow made him more dangerous. I need them before the morning call with Tokyo. Already on your desk, Mr. Kang. Brenda gestured toward his private office without standing. She'd learned not to make unnecessary movements around him, not to draw attention to the way her hands sometimes trembled when he came too close. Translated, cross-referenced, and annotated. The discrepancies you asked about are highlighted in red. For the first time since entering, he looked directly at her. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Just long enough for Brenda to feel the weight of that gaze like a physical touch against her skin. Just long enough for her to remember why she'd implemented her cardinal rule. Never, ever let him see what he does to you. You should go home, he said, already moving toward his office. Your son needs his mother. The mention of Caleb, her 7-year-old miracle, her reason for breathing, was like cold water on whatever heat had been building in her chest. This was the other dance they did. He reminded her she had a life outside these walls, and she pretended that life was enough to make her forget the electricity that crackled in the space between them. I'll leave once you've reviewed the files, she said, her voice professionally neutral, in case you have questions. Min-jae paused at his office door, his hand resting on the brushed steel handle. For a moment, she thought he might say something else, something that would cross one of the invisible lines they'd drawn around each other. Instead, he simply nodded and disappeared into his sanctuary. Brenda released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. She reached for her phone, checking the time and the 3 messages from her babysitter, Mrs. 1. Caleb asleep. Don't worry, take your time. But time was the one luxury Brenda couldn't afford. Not in this job. Not in this life she'd built on the razor's edge between legitimacy and something far darker. Because despite the corporate veneer, despite the legal-looking paperwork, and the respectable office address, Brenda knew exactly what the Kang Empire really was. She'd known since her 2nd week, when she'd accidentally opened a file she wasn't meant to see. Since she'd decoded enough conversations to understand that the imports they discussed weren't electronics. And the distribution networks had nothing to do with retail. She'd known since the night she'd watched Minjai wash blood from his hands in the executive bathroom, his face as calm as if he'd been washing away ink instead of evidence. She should have run then. Any sane woman would have grabbed her son and disappeared into the night. But Brenda had learned long ago that sanity was a luxury for people who had choices, and she'd made hers the moment she'd looked into Minjai's eyes that night, and he'd said, with devastating simplicity, "Now you know. The question is, can I trust you?" She'd said yes. God help her, she'd said yes. The sound of shattering glass exploded through the office. Brenda's head snapped up, her heart lurching into her throat. Through the open door of Minjai's office, she could see him standing perfectly still, staring at something on his computer screen. Around his feet, a crystal tumbler lay in pieces, expensive whiskey spreading across the marble floor like blood. "Mr. Kang?" She was on her feet before conscious thought, moving toward his office even as every instinct screamed at her to run in the opposite direction. He didn't turn around. His voice, when it came, was colder than she'd ever heard it. "Get out!" "Sir, what? Get out!" Each word was a bullet. "Go home to your son, Brenda. Now!" The use of her first name, so rare it felt like an intimacy, only amplified the wrongness of the moment. Something had shifted. Something had broken. And in the 3 years she'd worked for Kang Minjai, she learned that when things broke in his world, people bled. "Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. I have missed you all. Missed all the experiences we've been growing with. It's been a rough ride, but trust me. We're getting everything back and running. So stick around. I need your support on YouTube now more than ever. Thank you specially for sticking around to this very moment. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, back to the story. But Brenda didn't move. Something in the rigid set of his shoulders, in the way his hands had curled into fists at his sides, kept her frozen in the doorway. "What happened? This doesn't concern you." But his voice had lost some of its edge, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear? No, Kang Minjai didn't fear anything. That's what made him who he was. Then why can't I leave? The question escaped before she could stop it, before she could remember her place, her role, the walls they'd so carefully constructed. He turned then, and what she saw in his face stole the breath from her lungs. Rage. Yes, she'd expected that. Minjai wore rage like other men wore cologne. But beneath it, threaded through it like gold through rock, was something raw. Something that looked dangerously close to desperation. "Because," he said, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides, "in approximately 48 hours, someone is going to try to kill me. And if you're anywhere near me when they do, you'll die too." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that made Brenda's mind race. She should feel afraid. She should be calculating the fastest route to her apartment, the quickest way to pack Caleb's things and disappear. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Who?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. There and gone so fast she might have imagined it. "That," he said softly, "is the wrong question, Brenda." "Then what's the right one?" He was close enough, now that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated that probably had a French name she couldn't pronounce. Close enough that she could see the silver threading through the black hair at his temples, the tiny scar above his left eyebrow that she'd always wondered about. Close enough that the air between them felt combustible. "The right question," Minjai said, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that felt like drowning, "is whether you'll help me stop them." And there it was. The moment Brenda would look back on later and recognize as the point of no return. The moment when she should have said no, should have protected herself and her son, should have chosen the safe path she'd worked so hard to build. Instead, she thought of Caleb's college fund. Fattened by 3 years of Minjai's generous salary, she thought of the private school he attended, the medical insurance that covered his asthma treatments without question. She thought of every time Minjai had asked her to stay late, and every time he'd made sure a car service took her home safely. Every business dinner where he'd seated her at his right hand like she belonged there. Every encrypted file he'd trusted her to handle. Every secret he'd placed in her hands. Have you ever stood at a crossroads where every choice felt both right and wrong at the same time? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear about your moment of impossible decisions. She thought of the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't paying attention, like she was a riddle he couldn't solve, like she was something precious he didn't know how to hold without breaking. Tell me what you need, Brenda said, and felt the last wall between them begin to crack. Minjai moved to the bar cart near his desk, pouring 2 fingers of whiskey into a fresh glass. His movements controlled, precise. Betraying nothing of the storm she'd glimpsed moments before, the man was a master of masks, Brenda had learned. The question was which face he wore was the real one, or if perhaps they all were. 3 years ago, he began, not looking at her. When I hired you, do you know what my advisors said? Brenda remained in the doorway, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. I can imagine. They said I was being reckless, that an American woman, a Black American woman with no family ties to Korea, no connections to our business circles, was a liability, that you couldn't be trusted with the kind of information that flows through this office. He took a slow sip, his eyes distant. They said you were a weakness waiting to be exploited. The words stung, though Brenda had suspected as much. She'd felt the weight of those judgments in every sideways glance from the other executives, in every whispered conversation that stopped when she entered a room. And yet you hired me anyway. I did. Now he turned, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Do you know why? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Because when I interviewed you, I saw something my advisors are too jaded to recognize anymore. I saw a woman who understood survival, who knew what it meant to protect something more important than yourself. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. You came to that interview with a child's medical bill tucked in your portfolio. It fell out when you pulled out your resume. Do you remember? Brenda's throat tightened. She remembered. Caleb had been 5, and his asthma had landed him in the emergency room for the 3rd time that year. The bill had been crushing, $12,000, that her previous employer's insurance had refused to cover. She'd been mortified when it fluttered to the floor during her interview, certain it would cost her the job. You picked it up, Minjai continued, looked me dead in the eye and said, I have something more valuable than experience, Mr. Kang. I have a reason to be excellent at this job. He smiled, though there was no humor in it. That's when I knew. Knew what? That loyalty born from love is stronger than loyalty born from fear. My men fear me. They obey because disobedience means death. He set down his glass with careful precision. But you would walk through fire not because I commanded it, but because that fire stands between you and your son's future. The truth of his words settled over her like a weight. He'd seen through her from the very beginning, understood the calculations she'd made, the lines she'd been willing to blur, and he'd hired her anyway. Or perhaps because of it. What does this have to do with someone trying to kill you? Brenda asked, though part of her already knew. In Minjai's world, everything connected. Every relationship was a strategy, every kindness a chess move. Everything. He crossed to the windows, his silhouette stark against the Seoul skyline. The Kang Empire wasn't built on legal enterprises, Brenda. You know this. You've known it for years and chosen to stay. I've chosen to feed my son, she corrected. But the distinction felt hollow even as she said it. Have you? He glanced back at her, one eyebrow raised. Is that the only reason you've stayed? The only reason you're here at midnight on a Thursday, instead of home with that son you claim to be protecting? The question hit too close to truths Brenda had spent 3 years avoiding. Yes, the money mattered, the security, the benefits, the future she was building for Caleb. It all mattered. But if she was honest with herself, truly honest, she'd stayed for other reasons too. For the thrill of matching wits with one of the most dangerous men in Asia. For the addictive rush of being trusted with secrets that could topple governments. For the way Minjai looked at her sometimes, like she was the only real thing in a world of carefully constructed illusions. We're not talking about me, she said, deflecting. Someone wants you dead. Who? Minjai studied her for a long moment, and she could almost see him making calculations, weighing risks, deciding how much truth to offer. Finally, he said, My cousin, Park Jin-woo. The name was familiar. Brenda had processed enough wire transfers and property deeds to know the major players in the Kang family structure. Park Jin-woo managed the Busan operations, a portfolio that included shipping, real estate, and what the files euphemistically called import-export facilitation. Why? She asked. Because I've decided to go legitimate. The words were simple, but their implications were seismic. Or as legitimate as a man with my history can ever be. I'm 42 years old, Brenda. I've spent 20 years building an empire on blood and fear, and I'm tired. There was something in his voice, a weariness that made him seem suddenly human in a way that frightened her more than his violence ever had. Monsters she could understand, but a man who wanted redemption? That was infinitely more dangerous to her carefully maintained emotional distance. Your cousin doesn't approve of this plan, she said. My cousin has spent 15 years waiting for me to die or slip up so he can take control. Legitimacy threatens his ambitions. Legal businesses have oversight, accountability, paper trails. The kind of empire Jinwoo wants to build requires shadows. Minjai's jaw tightened. He's been quietly forming alliances with the Yakuza, promising them access to our Korean networks in exchange for backing his coup. A coup, Brenda repeated. You mean? I mean that in 48 hours during the annual board meeting, Jinwoo plans to make his move. He has 6 of the 12 board members in his pocket. If I die during the meeting, an unfortunate accident, a tragic attack by rivals, he assumes control by majority vote within hours. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. You found proof. Intercepted communications. One of my people in Busan is still loyal. He gestured to his computer. The files came through 20 minutes ago. Detailed plans, timelines, the name of the shooter they've hired. His voice went cold. And a contingency list. Contingency for what? For loose ends, people close to me who might ask questions or cause problems during the transition. He turned to face her fully, and the look in his eyes made her blood run cold. You're on that list, Brenda. 3rd name, right after my head of security and my attorney. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Me? Why, I'm just what? Just my office manager? Minjai's laugh was bitter. You've handled every sensitive file that's crossed this desk for 3 years. You know Bangkok's accounts, property holdings, business associates. You've sat in on meetings with politicians and prosecutors. You translate documents that could send half of Seoul's elite to prison. He took a step toward her. And Jin Woo is smart enough to know that the woman who manages Kang Min-jae's affairs knows where all the bodies are buried. Literally, in some cases. Brenda's mind raced. Caleb, Mrs. One, their apartment, everything she'd built, every wall she'd erected to keep her son safe from the darkness of this world. It had all been an illusion. She'd been marked the moment she'd accepted this job. Maybe even before that, the moment Min-jae had looked at her across that interview desk and seen something worth protecting. Or worth using. So, what do you want from me? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. You said you needed my help. How can I possibly help you stop an armed coup? Min-jae reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a flash drive, holding it up to the light. This contains copies of everything. Financial records, communications, video surveillance from our properties showing Jinwoo's meetings with Yakuza operatives. Enough evidence to destroy him and everyone backing him. Then use it. Expose him before the meeting. It's not that simple. If I move against Jinwoo directly, I start a war. The families backing him won't accept his removal without retaliation. Blood will spill across 3 countries. His fingers closed around the flash drive. But if he makes his move and fails, if his coup attempt is documented and witnessed by neutral parties, then I can eliminate him with the full support of the Syndicate Council. Self-defense, justified response, no war. The strategy was ruthless and elegant, exactly what she'd expect from Min-jae. But there was a piece missing. Where do I fit in? I need someone I trust absolutely to hold this insurance. Someone who isn't connected to the family, who can't be bought or intimidated by Jinwoo's people. He held out the flash drive. If something goes wrong at that meeting, if Jinwoo succeeds, I need you to take this to Agent Park Soo-jin at the National Intelligence Service. She's been building a case against the Yakuza for years. This would give her everything she needs. Brenda stared at the small piece of plastic and metal like it was a live grenade. You're asking me to betray your own family, to destroy the organization you've spent 20 years building. I'm asking you to survive. His voice was rough, raw, with something that sounded almost like emotion. If I'm dead, the empire doesn't matter anymore. But you have a son, a life, a future that has nothing to do with my sins. He pressed the flash drive into her palm, his fingers warm against her skin. Promise me. If I die, you take Caleb and run. You give this to Agent Park and disappear. The weight of the drive seemed impossibly heavy. Brenda looked up at him, really looked, and saw past the carefully constructed armor to the man beneath. A man who'd killed, yes, who'd built an empire on fear and violence, but also a man who'd hired a desperate single mother and paid for her son's medical care, who sent her home in cars at midnight and never once made her feel unsafe despite the power he held over her. A man who was, she realized with dawning horror, trying to protect her even as his world collapsed. "And if you don't die," she whispered, "if this plan works and you survive?" Something flickered in his eyes. Hope, maybe, or just the reflection of city lights. "Then maybe," he said softly, "we can talk about why you really stayed." The air between them felt charged with 3 years of unspoken things, of glances that lasted too long, and touches that were too careful. Brenda had spent so long pretending there was nothing between them but professional obligation, that she'd almost convinced herself it was true. Almost. "I stayed," she said, and her voice was barely audible. "Because my son needs stability. Because you pay well. Because? Minjai had moved closer without her noticing, or maybe she'd moved toward him. The space between them had shrunk to nothing, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Because you see me," she finished, and the admission felt like standing naked in front of him. Not just the single mom, not just the employee, you see, me. For a moment, just a heartbeat, his mask slipped entirely. She saw longing there, and loneliness, and a hunger that had nothing to do with power or control. His hand lifted, almost of its own accord, reaching for her face. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment like a stone through glass. Minjai stepped back, the wall slamming back into place so fast Brenda almost doubted they'd ever fallen. He checked the message, his face hardening. "My security team. They've picked up unusual activity near your apartment building." Ice flooded her veins. "Caleb, I'm sending men there now, but you need to go. Pack light. Whatever you and your son need for a few days. You're staying in one of my safe houses until this is over. I can't just disappear. My son has school. You have 48 hours to stay alive." Minjai cut her off, his voice hard as stone. "School doesn't matter if Jinwoo's people decide you're easier to eliminate before the meeting than after. Go, now." He was right, and they both knew it. Brenda closed her fist around the flash drive, feeling its edges bite into her palm. "What about you?" "I'll do what I've always done." His smile was sharp as a blade. "I'll survive." She wanted to say something more, to acknowledge what had almost happened between them, but the moment was gone, replaced by the cold calculus of survival. She turned toward the door, then paused. "Minjai?" It was the first time she'd used his given name. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "Don't die," she said simply. His response was quiet, almost too quiet to hear. "I'll try not to." The safe house was nothing like Brenda expected. She'd imagined something sterile and cold, a concrete bunker with barred windows and armed guards. Instead, Minjai's driver had brought them to a modern apartment in Gangnam, all floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture that probably cost more than her entire yearly salary. Caleb was asleep in the master bedroom, his small body curled around his favorite stuffed elephant. Mrs. Wan had been surprisingly cooperative when Brenda called with a vague story about a work emergency requiring them to relocate for a few days. The older woman had helped pack, asked no questions, and accepted the generous inconvenience fee Minjai's assistant had arranged. Now, at 3 a.m., Brenda stood at those expensive windows, watching Sol sleep, the flash drive burning a hole in her pocket. She'd tried calling Minjai twice. Both calls went to voicemail. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her finger hovered over the decline button, then something made her answer. "Hello? Ms. Jakes." The voice was male, accented, unfamiliar. "We haven't been formally introduced. My name is Park Jin-woo." Every muscle in Brenda's body went rigid. "How did you get this number?" "Please, I have access to everything in my cousin's empire, including his investments." The way he said the word made her skin crawl. "I'm calling because I believe we can help each other. I have nothing to say to you. Not even if I told you that Minjai has been lying to you, that the real reason you're in danger has nothing to do with business disputes and everything to do with what you mean to him." Brenda's heart hammered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Jinwoo's laugh was cold. "My cousin is many things, Miss Jakes, but sentimental isn't usually one of them. Yet he's hidden you away like treasure." Protected you. Paid you triple what your position warrants. Why do you think that is? Because I'm good at my job. Because you're his weakness. The one thing in his entire empire he can't afford to lose. A pause. Did he tell you about his wife? The word hit like a physical blow. His... What? Ah, I see he didn't mention her. Minseo. Beautiful woman. She died 8 years ago. Car accident. Or so the official report claimed. In truth, she was targeted because someone wanted to hurt Minjai. And they succeeded. Jinwoo's voice softened with false sympathy. He swore he'd never care about anyone again. Never give his enemies that kind of leverage. And yet here you are. Brenda's mind reeled. A wife. Minjai had been married, had loved someone enough to be destroyed by losing her. Here's my offer, Jinwoo continued. Give me what he gave you. The flash drive, the files, whatever evidence he's collected. In exchange, I'll ensure you and your son disappear safely. New identities, new country, enough money to start over. You'll never have to look over your shoulder again. And if I refuse, then you'll die at that board meeting. Not because I want to kill you, Miss Jakes, but because as long as you're alive, you're a threat. You know too much. And my cousin, he sighed, my cousin will watch you die and blame himself, just like he blamed himself for Minseo. The difference is this time, I'll make sure he follows you into the grave shortly after. The line went dead. Brenda stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. A wife. 3 years of working beside Minjai, of late nights and stolen glances, and moments that fell suspended in amber, and she'd never known. Had never seen a wedding ring, never heard him mention anyone. But then she'd never asked about his personal life. Had never pushed past the professional boundaries they'd maintained. Because asking meant opening doors, and opening doors meant admitting there was something between them worth naming. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Minjai. Are you safe? No greeting, just the question. Jinwoo called me. She heard his sharp intake of breath. He knows about the flash drive. He knows I'm here. A string of Korean curses, low and vicious. I'm coming to you. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me. Minjai, wait. But he'd already hung up. Brenda checked on Caleb. Still sleeping, peaceful, unaware that his mother's choices had put them both in the crosshairs of a war between monsters. She tucked the blanket around him, kissed his forehead, and whispered a prayer she wasn't sure anyone was listening to. Then she went to the living room and waited, the flash drive in one hand and her phone in the other, for the man with secrets to arrive and explain why she'd never been just an employee at all. Minjai arrived 30 minutes later, flanked by 2 security guards who positioned themselves outside the apartment. He looked different than she'd ever seen him, his tie gone, his shirt partially unbuttoned, his usually perfect hair disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. You should have told me Jinwoo made contact immediately, he said, pacing the living room like a caged predator. I'm telling you now. Brenda's voice was sharper than intended. Just like you should have told me about your wife. He stopped mid-stride, his back to her. The silence stretched so long she thought he might not respond at all. Minseo. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a curse. She wasn't supposed to be part of this world. I kept her separate, protected. Or so I thought. He turned, and the anguish in his eyes was naked, unguarded. They took her from me to prove a point, that no one in my position gets to have normal things. Love, family, peace. Who took her? The Yakuza clan I was at war with at the time. They've since been dealt with. But the lesson remained. His jaw tightened. I swore I'd never let anyone close again, that I'd never give my enemies ammunition. Then why did you hire me? The question escaped before Brenda could stop it. Why keep me around if I'm such a liability? Because I'm apparently a fool who can't follow his own rules. The admission seemed dragged from somewhere deep. You walked into my office with your son's medical bills and your impossible dignity, and I couldn't look away. The air between them felt electric, dangerous. Minjai, I know what you're going to say, that this is inappropriate, that I'm your employer, that you have a son to think about. He closed the distance between them. But Jinwoo was right about one thing. You aren't just an employee. You haven't been for a long time. Brenda's heart pounded so hard, she thought it might break through her ribs. Then what am I? The reason I'm trying to go legitimate. The reason I wake up and think maybe there's more to life than empire and violence. His hand lifted, hesitant. And this time when he touched her face, she didn't pull away. You're the possibility of redemption I don't deserve. She should step back. should remember all the reasons this was insane, the danger, the differences between them, the blood on his hands. But his touch was gentle, reverent, and the look in his eyes stripped away every defense she'd built. "I have a son," she whispered, but even she could hear it wasn't a rejection. "I know, and he deserves better than to grow up with a mother constantly in danger because of me." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "That's why you need to take the flash drive and run. Tonight. Let me handle Jinwoo alone." "No." "Brenda, no." She caught his wrist, holding his hand against her face. "You don't get to protect me by pushing me away. I stayed for 3 years knowing what you are, what you do. You think I didn't have chances to leave? Better offers? Safer positions?" Her voice cracked. "I stayed because somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a job. You stopped being just my employer. Then what am I?" He threw her words back at her. "The most terrifying mistake I've ever made." She laughed, the sound broken. "The man I can't afford to love but can't figure out how to stop caring about." The word, love, hung between them like a lit match near gasoline. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Minjai pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her with desperate strength. And Brenda buried her, face in his chest, and let herself, for just a moment, stop being strong. "I won't let Jinwoo hurt you," he murmured into her hair. "Or your son, whatever it takes." "Then don't go to that meeting alone." She pulled back enough to look up at him. "Let me help. Let me be your witness, your backup. I'm already in this, Minjai. You can't protect me by leaving me behind." Before he could argue, Caleb's sleepy voice drifted from the bedroom. "Mama?" Reality crashed back. Brenda stepped out of Minjai's arms, suddenly aware of how they must look, how inappropriate this all was. "I should go to him." Minjai's face had shuddered again. The moment of vulnerability locked away. "We'll talk strategy in the morning. For now, both of you need rest." But as Brenda went to comfort her son, she felt Minjai's eyes on her back and knew that everything had changed. The walls between them had finally crumbled, and there was no rebuilding them now. The board meeting was held in a private room at the Shilla Hotel, neutral territory, as tradition demanded. Brenda sat in the back corner, ostensibly there to take notes, but really present as Minjai's insurance policy. A witness. A wild card Jinwoo wouldn't expect. She'd left Caleb with Mrs. Wan at a different safe house, kissing him goodbye with a brightness she didn't feel, promising she'd be back by dinner. The flash drive was hidden in her bra, the one place she figured no one would search without her permission. 12 board members sat around the mahogany table, their faces masks of professional neutrality. Jinwoo sat directly across from Minjai, his smile sharp as broken glass. Between them sat the future of the Kang Empire. "Gentlemen," Minjai began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "I've called this meeting to discuss the restructuring of our operations. As you know, I've been working toward legitimizing our business interests. By destroying everything we've built," Jinwoo interrupted smoothly. "My cousin speaks of legitimacy as if it's a virtue. But what he really means is weakness. Capitulation to governments that would see us destroyed." Murmurs around the table. Brenda's pen stilled on her notepad. "I mean survival," Minjai countered. "The world is changing. Law enforcement has tools now that didn't exist 20 years ago. Digital surveillance, international cooperation, forensic accounting. We either adapt or we die. Or," Jinwoo said, standing slowly, "we remove the rod at the top and continue as we always have. Strong, unified, uncompromising." That's when Brenda saw it. The nearly imperceptible nod Jinwoo gave to the man standing by the door. The way that man's hand moved toward his jacket. "Minjai!" She was moving before conscious thought, her body acting on pure instinct. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Brenda felt the impact like a freight train. White-hot pain blossoming in her shoulder, as the bullet meant for Minjai's head found her instead. She hit the floor hard, her vision swimming, dimly aware of chaos erupting around her. Minjai's roar of rage, gunfire, screams, the metallic taste of blood in her mouth. Then his face above hers, his hands pressing against her shoulder, his voice ragged with something that sounded like terror. "No, no, no, Brenda, stay with me, stay with me." "The drive," she gasped, each word agony. "Inside pocket, left side." "Fuck the drive." His composure had shattered completely. "You're not dying. I won't let you." But darkness was pulling at her, soft and insistent. The last thing she saw before it claimed her was Minjai's face, and the realization that she'd never seen him cry before. Brenda woke to the smell of antiseptic and the steady beep of monitors. Hospital, private room. Through the fog of painkillers, she registered warm fingers wrapped around hers. Minjai sat in the chair beside her bed, still wearing his blood-stained shirt. Her blood, she realized distantly. His head was bowed, his free hand covering his face. He looked like a man at the end of everything. "You're still here," she whispered, her throat raw. His head snapped up, his eyes red-rimmed and fierce. "Where else would I be? Shouldn't you be dealing with Jinwoo, the board? Jinwoo is dead. I shot him myself after he shot you." His voice was flat, empty. "The board members who supported him are in custody. The ones who remained loyal are cleaning up the mess. My empire is secure." He laughed, the sound broken. "And all it cost was you nearly dying for me. I'm not dead. You were shot because of me, because I was selfish enough to keep you close, because I—" His voice cracked. "Min Seo died because I loved her, and I swore I'd never— But then you— Minjai." She squeezed his hand with what little strength she had. "I chose to be there, chose to warn you. You don't get to take that choice away from me. You shouldn't have had to make it." He was on his feet now, pacing like a caged animal. "You should be home with your son, safe, living a normal life, not bleeding out in a hotel because you—" He couldn't finish. "Because I love you," Brenda said quietly. He froze. "I love you," she repeated, stronger now despite the pain. "I have for a while, I think. Maybe since that first year when Caleb got sick and you personally called the hospital to authorize his treatment. Maybe before that. I don't know when it started, but I know what it is. You can't." But there was no conviction in his words. "I'm a killer, a crime lord, dangerous. Yes, I know. I've known for 3 years." She met his eyes steadily. "I also know you're the man who hired a single mother no one else would risk on, who sends me home safely every night, who's trying to build something better than what he inherited. That's the man I love." Minjai sank back into the chair, his face in his hands. When he looked up, tears tracked down his cheeks. The second time she'd seen him cry. "I can't protect you. Jinwoo proved that. As long as you're connected to me, you're a target. Then don't protect me." Her heart was breaking even as she said it. "Let me go. Let me take Caleb somewhere safe, somewhere you're not. Give us both a chance at the normal life you keep saying I deserve." The words hung between them, an ending neither wanted but both knew might be necessary. What would you sacrifice for love? Safety, or the person who makes you feel most alive? Let me know below. 3 days passed. 3 days of Brenda recovering in the hospital, of Minjai visiting only once more, briefly, formally, to ensure she had everything she needed. He'd arranged for her medical bills to be covered, for a generous severance package, for relocation assistance if she wanted it. He was letting her go, giving her the out she'd suggested. And it was killing her. On the 4th day, Mrs. Wan brought Caleb to visit. Her 7-year-old burst into the room with the resilience of childhood, his fear quickly replaced by fascination with the hospital equipment. "Does it hurt, Mama?" he asked, staring at her bandaged shoulder. "A little, baby, but I'm okay. Mrs. Wan said you were a hero, that you saved someone important." His eyes, so much like his father's, though that man had never bothered to stick around, were wide with admiration. "Like a superhero." Brenda's throat tightened. "I just did what I had to do. That's what heroes do, though." Caleb climbed carefully onto the bed beside her. "They do the hard thing because it's right, even when they're scared." Out of the mouths of babes, Brenda held her son close, breathing in his little boy's smell of soap and playground dust, and realized something fundamental. She'd been trying to protect Caleb by playing it safe, by keeping her distance from Minjai, by building walls. But what kind of lesson was that teaching him? That love wasn't worth the risk? That you should run from the hard things? Her own mother had run, from Brenda's father, from responsibility, from anything difficult. And Brenda had spent her whole life determined to be different, to stay, to fight. When had she forgotten that? After Caleb left, Brenda sat up despite the pain, reached for her phone, and made a call. "I need to see him. Tonight. At the office." Minjai stood at his windows, staring out at Seoul like he had the night this all began. He didn't turn when she entered, even though he must have heard her. "You should be resting," he said to the glass. "I should be a lot of things, Brenda crossed the office, each step sending twinges through her shoulder. But mostly, I should be with you. Now he turned, his expression carefully neutral. Brenda, I know what you're doing. You're pushing me away to protect me. Very noble, very self-sacrificing. She stopped in front of him. Also very stupid. I almost got you killed. No, Jin Woo almost got me killed. You gave me a choice, and I made it. I'd make it again. She reached up with her good arm, touching his face. I love you, Minjai. Not despite the danger, not ignoring who you are. I love you because I see all of it, the darkness and the light, and I choose it anyway. What about Caleb? Caleb deserves a mother who's brave enough to fight for what she wants, who shows him that love is worth the risk. Her voice softened. He also deserves a chance to know the man who's been more of a father figure in 3 years than his biological father ever was. Something broke in Minjai's expression, the last wall crumbling. I don't know how to do this, how to be someone's person. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. She smiled despite the tears on her cheeks. That's what love is, isn't it? Figuring it out as you go. He pulled her against him, careful of her injury, and buried his face in her hair. I love you, he whispered. God help me. I love you so much it terrifies me. Good, Brenda said, holding him tight. Love should be a little terrifying. 6 months later, the transformation was visible everywhere. The Kang Empire, now officially Kang International Holdings, had divested from its shadow operations. Real estate, legitimate shipping, technology investments. Minjai had kept his word about going legitimate, though Brenda knew the transition wasn't without casualties. Some of his old associates had walked away. Others had been encouraged to find new employment. But tonight wasn't about business. Tonight was personal. Brenda stood in front of the mirror in Minjai's, their penthouse, adjusting the emerald dress he'd chosen for her. Her shoulder had healed, leaving only a small scar she decided not to hide. It was part of her story now, part of them. Mama, you look like a princess. Caleb bounced into the room, already dressed in his little suit. In 6 months, he'd grown comfortable in this new life, splitting time between the penthouse and their kept apartment. More importantly, he'd grown to love Minjai, who'd proven surprisingly patient with 7-year-old questions and surprisingly good at helping with homework. Thank you, baby. She kissed his forehead. You look very handsome. Minjai, said tonight is special, is it? Before she could answer, Minjai appeared in the doorway, devastating in a tailored tuxedo. His eyes met hers in the mirror, and the heat in them made her breath catch even after 6 months together. Very special, he confirmed, offering his hand to Caleb. Ready, both of you? The charity gala was being held at the same hotel where Brenda had taken a bullet. Minjai had bought the building 2 months ago and converted it into a center for single parents. Job training, childcare, medical assistance. A redemption project, though he'd never call it that. As they entered the ballroom, cameras flashed. The press had been fascinated by their story. The crime lord going legitimate and the woman who'd changed him. Brenda had learned to tolerate the attention, though she preferred the quiet moments between them. Midway through the evening, Minjai led her onto the balcony, away from the crowds. Seoul glittered below them, the same view they'd had from his office that night. Everything changed. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Brenda's heart stopped. Minjai, I know what you're going to say, that it's too soon, that we should wait, that Caleb should be consulted. He opened the box, revealing a ring. Simple, elegant, perfect. But I've waited 30 years to find you. I'm not waiting anymore. You haven't actually asked me anything yet, she pointed out, laughing through sudden tears. He dropped to one knee, and the great Kang Minjai, former crime lord, current business mogul, the man who'd killed to protect her, looked up at her with absolute vulnerability. Brenda Jakes, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you? Yes. The word came without hesitation. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, stood, and kissed her with a passion that still made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, she saw Caleb watching from the doorway, grinning. Does this mean Minjai's going to be my dad for real? He asked. Minjai knelt down to Caleb's level. Only if you want me to be. Caleb threw his arms around Minjai's neck. I want that. I want that a lot. And Brenda, watching the two people she loved most in the world embrace, finally understood what redemption looked like. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building something better from the ruins. 1 year later, Brenda stood in the nursery of their home, rocking gently as she cradled their daughter, Min-hee, named for Min-jae's late wife, with Brenda's blessing. Some loves didn't compete. They coexisted, honoring what was while embracing what could be. The room was painted soft yellow, filled with both Korean and American touches, a visual representation of the life they'd built together, blended, complicated, beautiful. Min-jae appeared in the doorway, Caleb riding on his shoulders despite being almost too big for it. Her son, their son now, officially adopted 3 months ago, giggled as Min-jae pretended to stumble. "Careful with him," Brenda chided gently. "I'm always careful with our family," Min-jae replied, and the word "our" still sent warmth through her chest. He'd kept his promise. The empire was legitimate now, though Brenda knew his reputation still preceded him. Some fears, once earned, never fully disappeared. But he wielded that reputation differently now, protecting rather than threatening, building rather than destroying. After tucking Caleb into bed with a story about a brave knight and a fearless queen, they returned to the nursery. Min-jae took Min-hee from Brenda's arms, his large hands gentle as he laid their daughter in her crib. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly, watching their daughter sleep. "Choosing this life, the complications, the scrutiny, the—" "Never." Brenda wrapped her arms around him from behind. "Not for a single moment." He turned in her embrace, his forehead resting against hers. "I spent so many years thinking I didn't deserve happiness. That redemption wasn't meant for men like me. And now? Now I wake up every morning next to you and think maybe grace isn't something you earn. Maybe it's something you accept when it's offered." His lips brushed hers softly. "You offered me grace, Brenda. You and Caleb, and now Min-hee. You gave me a family when I thought I'd lost the right to have one. You gave me something too," she said. "You saw me, really saw me, when everyone else just saw a struggling single mom. You gave me purpose, partnership, passion. You gave me a love story I never thought I'd have." They stood together in the soft glow of the nightlight, their daughter sleeping peacefully, their son safe down the hall, and the city they'd claimed as theirs spreading out beyond the windows. The journey from that first night in his office, when she'd been just an employee and he'd been just her dangerous boss, to this moment had been anything but simple. There had been bullets and blood, secrets and sacrifice. There had been fear and fury, and moments when the easy choice would have been to walk away. But love, Brenda had learned, was rarely easy. It was brave. It was choosing to stay when running would be safer. It was taking the bullet, speaking the truth, fighting for the future you wanted even when the odds seemed impossible. As Min-jae pulled her close and they swayed together in the quiet darkness, Brenda thought about the woman she'd been, desperate, afraid, alone, and she looked at the woman she'd become, loved, strong, whole. Some stories ended with happily ever after. Theirs was more complicated than that, messier, more real, but it was theirs. And that made it perfect. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine, so do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.